Story 1. We were not allowed to chew gum after 4:30 because we would not be getting enough use out of it before dinner at 6 o'clock. Story 2. We were not allowed to talk during meals. My parents said it was to teach us discipline, but it just made dinners really awkward. Story 3. It was actually a friend, not me. Basically, at his house, he and his brother were allowed in only 3 rooms: their bedrooms and the bathroom. The kitchen, living room, and conservatory were completely off limits. If they wanted water, they had to ask, and a parent would bring a glass from the kitchen. The conservatory was used for family meals, but apparently, a lot of the time they just gave the kids food on plates to eat in their rooms. It really weirded me out as a kid when I went over. I would be greeted by the parents. They would escort me to my friend's bedroom, then close the door behind me. When it was time to leave, my friend had to call for his parents to escort me out. No idea why they had this rule. The mother did not work and literally sat at home all day, every day, just chain smoking in the living room. Story 4. My mother was in a constant struggle with the deer that repeatedly ate her garden. She was willing to try every trick she could find to keep them away from her beloved plants. One article she read said that the smell of human urine deters deer. For about 6 months, the 3 males in the house were not allowed to use the toilet. We had to go outside and urinate somewhere around the perimeter of her garden. At night, we had to urinate in jugs next to the toilet so she could sprinkle it around her garden the next day. It was not as successful as she had hoped. The final solution was an 8-foot-tall fence around the entire garden a few years later. Story 5. I was not allowed to do anything near a window. My mother was convinced that our neighbors were always watching us, so I had to crouch down whenever I went by a window. Story 6. When I was young, my mother made us go to bed at 6 p.m. I remember the sun being out and hearing children outside playing. She got married soon after, and the man had a daughter, so that rule went away. I think she just did not want to deal with us. We spent all day outside playing when we were not at school and were not allowed to come in until she called us in for dinner. Then it was baths and bedtime. Cannot imagine just napping, never checking on my children, and having young kids roaming the neighborhood all day. I had a friend who lived down the street. Her mother was like my second mother. I remember roller skating, falling on my knee, scraping it badly, and her cleaning and bandaging it because I was not allowed to go home. On school days, we were in after-school childcare until they closed, then home, dinner, and bed. Story 7. Guests were not allowed to use the upstairs washroom, specifically if my siblings or I had friends over. We were not allowed to offer them any food or drinks except water. I am pretty sure my mother just wanted to make the house as inhospitable as possible to discourage those friendships. She believed that friends were a distraction and that studying was all that mattered. Story 8. My parents were hoarders. We were not allowed to mess with their belongings in any way. It was a nightmare to live in. My father died when I was young, but after my mother passed away, we had the house and its contents condemned, demolished, and the land sold. To this day, clutter makes me anxious. Story 9. My father refused to buy a weed eater or an edger. He made me edge the yard with barber scissors. This was not a punishment. It was just Saturdays. Story 10. We were not allowed to touch, bump, or lean on any walls, both interior and exterior. Story 11. We were not allowed to cut through the flower bed out front to get to the sidewalk. The rule is perfectly fine. It was just that my mom convinced her young children that a family of dead people would grab your ankles and pull you into the ground for eternity if you set foot in the garden. It absolutely terrified me until I was old enough to know better. Story 12. My parents never let me watch people kissing on television when I was a child. I am not sure what they were trying to teach me, but I guess I should thank them for my adult awkwardness in public displays of affection situations. Story 13. Not allowed to take naps when I was a teenager because I am too young to be tired, even after I got a job and had to be up at 5 a.m. Story 14. The most bizarre house rule that I have encountered was at my friend's place, where they had a strict policy of no talking during dinner. This was not due to any traditional reason, but because their elderly grandmother believed that a mischievous spirit living in the dining room would learn secrets and cause chaos. Story 15. When my brother and I had a fight, We would be locked in a dog cage in the backyard. If we fought in the car, we would get punished and were forced to wear pillowcases on our heads until we reached our destination. Could be 45 minutes up to 4 hours. We laughed about it, telling friends, and only realized how wrong it was when we saw our friends were not laughing. Story 16. We were not allowed outside if an adult was not home, even in high school. I got off the bus with a group of kids and stood outside chatting with them for a few minutes before going home. A neighbor reported me. I was grounded for 2 weeks. I decided that if I could not stay outside for a few minutes, I would invite them into the house since no one said I could not. I was grounded for a month. No wonder I have problems making friends, Mom. Story 17. Do not ever spill a drink or my father would fly into an insane rage. Story 18. My dad built our home with his bare hands. We grew up kind of house poor because of how much my parents sacrificed to get 5 beautiful acres and build a home. My dad insisted we make things last, which included walking, or rather waddling, down the carpeted hallway edges instead of the middle like a normal person. If we walked normally, the carpet nap in the middle would get worn out and look shabby. Story 19. If I stepped outside in my socks, even just outside the door for 2 seconds, the socks were considered dirty, and I was not allowed back inside unless I was barefoot. Meanwhile, shoes could be worn in the house with no problem. Story 20. If we did not hang up the phone properly or left it off the hook, we were told the phone police would come and arrest us. We checked for dial tones carefully to make sure we were not going to jail. Story 21. I couldn't walk in the living room. It was vacuumed in stripe patterns so they would know if there were footprints. When I had to vacuum it, I wouldn't turn it on, just push it to create the stripes. Story 22. Before we could play ping pong, which was in the detached garage, we had to clean any oil or grease spots on the floor with kerosene and a rag. Also, and this continued into my middle 20s, we had a code for calling the landline because my stepfather refused to get caller identification long after it was included free on most phone services. Ring 3 times and hang up. Ring twice and hang up. Then our mom or stepdad would pick up the 3rd time we called. Story 23. Not being allowed to have feelings that others disagreed with. Story 24. With a 10 p.m. curfew. If you are not home by 9:59, you are already late. Story 25. Could not even say gosh because it was too close to taking the Lord's name in vain. Story 26. Hyper-Christian parents were very worried about Satanism in the 1990s and early 2000s, so no Pokemon or anything with magic. All my friends played RuneScape and Dungeons and Dragons. Also, no Halloween or anything with monsters. As a parent now, Pokemon is my favorite show to watch with my child, and Halloween is probably my favorite holiday. Somehow, I have not tried to summon the devil or perform any satanic rituals. Story 27. I got grounded for calling dinner roast beast. Like the Grinch says, my dad grew up in extreme poverty. Story 28. Oh, where do I even begin? 1. No curse words, not even the word crud. Couldn't say the acronym BS, not the actual word, and had to say, I don't think so. Couldn't even use it when playing the game BS. 2. Girls didn't fart. They fluffed. Couldn't say farted. 3. Had to make our beds in the morning or we were grounded for the entire day. 4. Couldn't have an attitude or be grounded for weeks at a time. 5. The strictest etiquette when eating. Could not enjoy a meal because you were constantly criticized. 6. Could not make any messes or leave any personal belongings outside your bedroom or else they would be thrown away without consulting you. 7. Had to shut lights off when leaving a room, even if you were coming back minutes later. I was grounded a lot. My dad was in the military, so he was very strict about just about everything, and any toe out of line got you grounded. Now that he's older, he admits he was too hard on me. Story 29. Not allowed to do homework on the weekends. Was forced to have family television time instead, where we watch Days of Our Lives, of all things. I would secretly do it after everyone went to bed. Story 30. Do not walk across the large floor grate in the middle of the hall because if you fall in, there is no good way to get you out. Story 31. We had a whole living room that we could not enter unless we had company. Story 32. My dad had severe obsessive-compulsive disorder. He converted our garage into a studio apartment that we were never allowed to enter. He had his own dishes, and if we were ever caught using them, they became family dishes. Even washing them was not enough. They were considered ruined. He boiled everything he put on the barbecue, including chicken, ribs, and hamburgers. All were boiled first. There were many cleaning quirks, but I will leave there for now. I could go on for days. I thought many of these things were normal until I stayed the night at my first friend's house. He went to the cupboard to get me a cup for a drink. I said, "You can just use any cup you want." His mom asked me why. I told her what my house was like. I remember the look she gave me, and from then on, she always invited me over for sleepovers. We were not abused, but she thought our home life was insane. Story 33. Do not make funny faces because your face will get stuck like that. Do not cut hair at night because witches will steal it. Do not drink coffee because it will stunt your growth. Do not vacuum at night because it will suck up the spirits. Story 34. When hanging clothes on the line, the pegs needed to be color coordinated with the clothes. Story 35. It was my dad's unusual rule. We were not allowed to sit on any furniture in the house if we were wearing clothing that had been worn outside. We had to come in and change clothes immediately. No one was a germaphobe. He could never explain it, but that was his habit. It finally stopped when I was about 12, I think. Story 36. We were not allowed to say, "That's not fair," because life is not fair. To this day, I am preoccupied with fairness, equality, and justice to an almost obsessive extent. It sounds like the beginning of a superhero movie, but it is just crippling anxiety. Story 37. I was not allowed to say no. I was not allowed to smile either. Story 38. My mom always cooked at home. There were 7 of us, and eating out was always too expensive. If we said we did not like something without trying it first, my mom would make us eat 2 helpings of it. It was okay to say you did not like something after you tried it, and she would not make you eat it. Only if you had not tried it. I thought it was a fair rule. It was difficult, but it made our taste buds more adventurous. Story 39. Unless it was for school or I was with one of my parents, my sister and I were never allowed to leave the apartment. We couldn't have friends over, and we couldn't go to friends' houses. This is probably why I am such a homebody now with anxiety issues around people. Story 40. If the refrigerator door was open, with or without a child kneeling behind it, my father would body slam it closed. We had a lot of concussions. My mother probably did not believe in hospital visits until pain was present for 3 days, and head injuries were easy to fake, according to her. Story 41. No naps. Not in the car, the house, or if you were sick, etc. My dad couldn't nap, terrible sleeper. So we couldn't either. 12-hour road trip. No sleeping in the car and no whining either. Flu? Doesn't matter. I think the only exception was when one of my migraine medications made me vomit for hours before I would fall asleep with my head pressed onto the edge of the bathtub, and he would leave me alone. Basically, if he was awake, you had to be awake. I really love naps as an adult. Story 42. Not allowed to walk around in socks without shoes. I got my revenge when I moved into my first nice apartment alone. They came to visit, and I made them take their shoes off at the door. Story 43. The only food or drink allowed to leave the kitchen is water. This rule remains in adulthood. Story 44. This was not my house, but a friend's across the street. Evidently, his father did not want us ringing the doorbell or using the front door. If we wanted to visit, we were supposed to go around to the side of the house and knock on the door by the kitchen, which nobody ever heard. It was strange. Generally, if you wanted to play, it was best to call him first so he could meet you outside. They had a separate phone line for the kids, which was unusual to have in the 1970s. Story 45. My mom's boyfriend from when I was about 5 to 12 years old would not let us have breakfast after around 9 to 9:30 in the morning. We had to wait until lunch if we were late. The 3 boys, including his son from another year, were sent to the basement so he could mostly pretend we did not exist and have my mom to himself. It was my mom's house. I called him Dad because my biological father passed away, when I was around 2 or 3 years old. There was no goodbye when my mom ended the relationship and he moved out. I was and am friends with his son and saw him occasionally after that. We never talked about it. He passed away from coronavirus a couple of years ago. Story 46. When my wife, then girlfriend, and I moved in together, she lit a candle that was on our coffee table. I thought, what are you doing? At that moment, I realized that some people actually burn candles instead of just having them for decoration, like my mom. Story 47. No chores. I'm dead serious. My mother was so overprotective she wouldn't let me do any kind of chores. She never let me near appliances or showed me how to do the most basic housework. The only thing she told me to do was clean my room, but never showed me how to clean it. So my room was always messy. Now I'm 25 and had to beg my father to show me how to use the dishwasher, clothes washer and dryer and oven. I can wash clothes and cook frozen food in the oven. That's all I can do. I'm still scared of the stove. And now I can't get my mother to show me anything because she has been dead for 11 years. Story 48. No shoes were allowed on a table, ever. If you bought new shoes in a box or a bag and put them on a table, my mom would lose her temper. She claimed that it was bad luck and that someone you knew or loved would die as a result. Story 49. My mother would make me provide a urine sample for her occasionally so she could pass a drug test. Story 50. I was not allowed to be inside during the day. If the sun is up, I have to go. Story 51. We could not order food for delivery, such as pizza, because we feared harm from the delivery person. Story 52. Going to the toilet. First, I had to ask permission. Then, I had to wait until the toilet door was unlocked. My mother would stand by the open toilet door until I sat down. I would then hand her the toilet paper. Mother would tear off 3 squares and hand them to me. That was all I was allowed. If I needed more, my parents took it as a sign that I was eating and drinking too much. Story 53. No morning showers allowed because apparently it costs more to shower in the morning compared to showering at night. As an adult with my own home and children, I do not mind when they bathe as long as it happens. Also, there is almost no difference in water usage between morning and night at my house. Story 54. We had many food rules that likely contributed to my eating disorder in high school. No gum, no candy, no fast food, and no processed foods. While these rules might not seem unreasonable on the surface, my parents were extreme and obsessed with being thin and having thin daughters. Additionally, there was no television on Sundays due to a strange church rule. Story 55. Was not allowed to say I do not know, but I was not allowed to lie either. I was also not allowed to say I would find the answer. So yes. Story 56. We could only eat 1 piece of popcorn at a time. I guess they were worried about us choking. Story 57. Do not ask my grandfather about his grandfather. After he passed away, we did ancestry research and found no records beyond my great-grandfather. It is very mysterious. No one would ever talk about it. Story 58. Not me, but my dad grew up on a farm in Kansas with his 6 siblings. His grandmother believed that children should be seen and not heard. If Dad and his siblings were in the house while she was there, they had to sit quietly on the couch in the living room. So, they usually found a field or something peaceful to play in outside. Story 59. My siblings, cousins, and I were slapped by our parents if we answered our grandparents back in their native language. We understood it, but it was the only language they spoke. We had to use only English when speaking. Story 60. When your father comes home with the look, run as fast as you can to the steep stairs to attack and lock the door. Listen through the vents. Story 61. When my father came home from work each day, he would go into his study with a whiskey, and we were not allowed to talk to him for 1 hour. I have to admit, I kind of wish I had this rule myself, but my children would not follow it in a million years. I feel that missing an extra hour with them every day would be doing myself a disservice. Story 62. If we said something was bad, we had to listen to our homophobic dad rant about what we would really be doing. Like, I do not know, I am in 5th grade, I am using slang, not saying I would like something inappropriate. To this day, my dad hates when I say it, so I just moved 1,000 miles away instead and say whatever I want. Story 63. Do not bring snakes inside. To be fair, it was a reactionary rule. Story 64. No sitting on couches. Only 1 cup of water per meal. Only 1 fun activity per weekend. Sunday was family day. No using the phone. You can talk to your friends at school. Could not say him or she when referring to mom or dad. There were too many strange rules, and they all depended on mom's moods. Story 65. I still have to follow these rules because I live at home, even though I am 21 years old. The rent is very high. I cannot lock my bedroom door or any bathroom doors during the day when I am in my room or using the bathroom. My father gets angry and tries to force the doors open. This situation feels emotionally abusive in my opinion. Story 66. Squeeze the toothpaste tube from the bottom or suffer lunatic ravings from my dad. Of course, now that I am programmed that way, my husband squeezes from the middle, and it drives me insane. Story 67. To the best of my knowledge, this is still the rule there today. It does not matter if it is 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, or even hotter and extremely humid outside. The moment the clock hits 4 or 5 p.m. during the hottest part of a summer day, the air conditioning must be turned off, all windows immediately opened, and it is time to cook dinner. Not just any dinner. We have to add insult to injury. We pick the hottest July day to make a dinner that requires 2 huge pans of sizzling food that takes a long time to cook and 2 huge pots of boiling stew dumping heat and humidity into the house for at least an hour, usually much longer. The house will easily reach 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The reason is that heat-intensive dinners that take a long time to cook cannot be made during cooler months, at night, or while the air conditioning is on because it will ruin the food. Story 68. My parents assumed eating food without seasoning was healthier, so we were forbidden to use salt, pepper, and condiments in our meals for almost a decade. Story 69. Every weekend I had to mow and edge the front and backyard regardless of whether the grass was alive or not. We lived in Southern California, and in summer the lawn would just die for about 6 months of the year. I still had to mow it every Saturday. By September, it was basically just dragging a mower over bare dirt. Story 70. I had inconsistent rules about what I could watch on television or how I could sit based on who was watching me. Dad's grandparents would not allow me to watch Rugrats and Hey Arnold, even though I watched them at home all the time. For too long, they forced me to watch good, albeit little kid shows like Madeline and Bear in the Big Blue House when I was 8 or 9. When I was very young, I could make pillow forts with couch cushions at my other grandparents' house, but one related great aunt did not allow me to build forts. Other grandparents did not allow me to watch Pokemon because it was considered evil due to evolution, but I was allowed to watch all that. Story 71. For some reason, my parents hated it when they asked my brother and me where we wanted to eat for dinner on the nights we did not eat at home, and we would reply, "I do not care." Truly drove them nuts. We started saying, "I have no preference." And strangely, that response never bothered them. I still do not understand it to this day. Story 72. No boys are allowed to stay overnight. It worked out well until my parents discovered I am gay when my mother walked in on me with one of my girlfriends. Story 73. This one isn't too bad. We weren't allowed to watch restricted rated movies. This was before Netflix and streaming platforms, so it was easy to enforce. My sister and I never actively tried to break this rule because we didn't really mind it. It's only funny now when my husband asks me about iconic movies from around the 1990s to 2000s, and he is always shocked I haven't seen them. My response is always something like, "Well, it's restricted rated, so I have to ask my parents." It has become an inside joke. Story 74. When I was in high school, after my parents found out I was bisexual, they decided I was no longer allowed to wear pants with excessive zippers on them, other than the fly, because everyone believes that all bisexual people who wear more zippers than necessary do drugs. Story 75. Ours was, don't sit on the trunk. It is a camelback trunk that my brother and I would pull out into the middle of the room, put a pony saddle on it, and ride it. We had a perfectly good pony outside. Story 76. It's hard for me to spot a rule that's weird. Usually, I don't notice something is off until I bring it up and people look at me strangely. This is minor, but I wasn't allowed to cross my arms because it made me look like a boy. My mom would smack me if she caught me doing it. I was raised in an abusive household with many nonsensical rules, but that one was probably the most baffling, especially because I was the only one who got in trouble for it despite my sister doing it. Story 77. There were false accusations that I was taking too many of the good pieces of food shared with my sibling. For example, the buttery popcorn pieces, the nacho with the most toppings, the chunkiest puppy chow pieces, and so on. Because of this, I was not allowed to look at the food while we ate. I had to look straight ahead at the television and eat without looking. Story 78. No summoning paranormal entities. This actually had to be said to my siblings and me. Story 79. My mother moved from Ukraine to the West in her 20s. She was convinced there was still acid rain due to the Chernobyl disaster, so I was never allowed to get my head wet in the rain. Story 80. If my brother and I fought, we were made to stand in stress positions. Apparently, those were torture methods used in special air service training. However, it did not stop us from fighting. Story 81. There was a lady all the neighborhood kids loved because she would stand outside and give us snacks. However, if you really had to go, she wouldn't let you use her toilet. At first, I thought she was strange because she would firmly grab your shoulders, lead you to the bathroom, and stand outside the door waiting for you. She asked me if I washed my hands, and I told her yes. She praised me because she heard the water running. She wore a hijab, so I think she was Muslim. I heard being clean was part of their belief, but at the time, I didn't know what a Muslim was. I miss her cooking. Story 82. During the summers when my brother and I were home alone, we were only allowed to watch Andy Griffith, Leave It to Beaver, or Barney. We had to write essays every day detailing what happened in the episodes to prove we watched them. This continued until I was 16. Story 83. There were so many. We had 2 doors onto the front porch. We were only allowed to open one, and that was just to get the mail. I only remember one time when the other door was open. Ice cube trays, having been emptied, must be rinsed and set in the dish drainer to dry. Don't just refill them and put them back in the freezer because, according to my mother, the droplets of water or any leftover ice bits wouldn't mix properly with the new water, and your ice would be wrong. There was a method to how the floors must be vacuumed. When washing the car, you start at the bottom and go up because otherwise you get streaks. I said it made more sense to start at the top and let the water work its way down and loosen the dirt, but no, you had to start at the bottom. Story 84. Have a hot shower if you get sunburned to take the sting off it. I did not realize how horrible that advice was until I told my wife in my late 20s. Story 85. My dad built his house and was very enthusiastic about putting holes in the walls. I remember asking if I could hang a calendar in my room, and he said no. Story 86. No laughing in the house. If you want to laugh, go outside. Story 87. When my father got home, we could not talk to him until he finished eating dinner. Story 88. We were not allowed to whistle because my grandmother and mother believed it would conjure snakes. They saw this in a movie from their home country when they were young. Also, no shadow puppets were allowed because they would come alive again due to a movie they saw. Story 89. This is the most lighthearted response I've got. We weren't allowed to watch Tiny Toons because it encouraged violence. My mother never used the word gun. She always said artillery in an attempt to discourage my brother and me from any interest in firearms. She was a soldier. Joke's on her. We are both firearms enthusiasts and enjoy target shooting. Story 90. One time when I was a small kid, I was crying. My dad told me that Indigenous treaty kids never cried. It did not pay them to cry. I grew up believing that Indigenous Canadian kids never cried. Story 91. We were not allowed to look directly at the microwave when it was running. Story 92. My father had a fear of leaving the country. It was unusual but true, so we had a rule that we could never leave the country. That seemed easy, but we lived in South Texas, and it seemed like everyone went to Mexico for vacation or the weekend. I had friends whose families had beach houses or second homes in Mexico. It did not matter, we could not go, never. Story 93. No talking at the dinner table. No getting food or anything after the kitchen is closed at night. Story 94. My mother made me wash my hair with shampoo every night, but I was not allowed to use conditioner because the extra time in the shower would increase the water bill. My hair was like straw and had split ends halfway up the strands before I moved out. Story 95. We were not allowed to bring candy into the house. One Halloween, my stepdad lost his temper over candy wrappers being left around, so he made this rule. Halloween was never the same. Story 96. I was not allowed to forget anything or make any mistakes. If I did, I was berated for hours. Story 97. I was not allowed to play the shadow game where you copy the leader because my brother made me say fart, and my mom overheard it. Story 98. I could dye my hair any color and cut it however I wanted, but I was not allowed to use hairspray because my dad did not like how it felt on his girlfriend's hair in high school. Story 99. My mother had some very strange rules when we were growing up that oddly became stricter as I got older. You had to serve yourself everything that was available at a meal and eat everything on your plate. Fortunately, I am not picky with food now. You had to take a glass or cup back to the kitchen immediately after finishing your drink, and were not allowed to leave it somewhere or forget it, or there would be serious consequences. My curfew in high school was between midnight and 1 a.m. It changed to 10 p.m. in my early 20s. I had to be in bed by 10 p.m. with the lights off. Story 100. Wife could not eat the frosting on cupcakes. They were forced to scrape it off. Story 101. I was not allowed to give out my phone number or tell other children where I lived, and I was not allowed to have friends from school over. I was only allowed to spend time with children in my neighborhood. My parents divorced when I was a toddler. My father initiated the divorce, and my mother missed the custody hearing because she was out of the country visiting family with me and my little brother. She was supposed to hand us over when she got off the plane home. Instead, she took another flight to a different state and essentially kidnapped us. Story 102. No footstep sounds, no slipper sounds, no stepping on creaky floors, and so on. I am almost 40, and people still ask me why I walk so quietly and freak them out. Story 103. My parents would literally tell us to duck or hide under the seat when a police officer drove by. They said if the officer saw us in the back of the car, they would take us to jail. But now that I am growing up, I realize it was because we were kids in the back seat without car seats. I'm not sure if they really understood that and were just told this by other foreigners, so they followed along. Story 104. We were not allowed to sit on any beds in the house with our street clothes on. Also, my stepmom got these really nice custom couches from Italy. We were not allowed to sit on them for about 3 years, especially if we had our street clothes on. Street clothes means the clothes you wore outside in public. Also, if you were sick, you had to drink from the poison bottle, which was straight oregano juice. It was awful. Story 105. I was feral. I cannot think of a single rule other than do not be an unpleasant person. Story 106. We kids were not allowed to eat at the table. We had a different table to eat at. Once we went outside, we were not allowed back in until late evening. We had a roll of toilet paper that was kept in a coffee can. We took the toilet paper with us out in the woods to do our business. A few bologna sandwiches were handed out the door and one plastic cup to share. Story 107. During summers in Texas in the 1980s, on most days my brother and I were told not to be in the house from 9 a.m. until lunch, and immediately after lunch, usually 12:30, until dinner, usually 6 p.m. If we were thirsty, we were told to drink from the garden hose. If we wanted to roam around the very large neighborhood, we could, but we were told which streets were within the boundaries, essentially the major roads that were the entrances to the neighborhood. If we wanted to go to a friend's house in the neighborhood, we had to call them if we were inside the friend's house. That lasted from the time I was 8 until the time I was 13. My brother and I were far enough apart in age that we didn't really roam the neighborhood together. I am amazed I was never kidnapped. Story 108. At my babysitter's house, we had to eat the meals standing in the kitchen. Only after finishing the food were we allowed to have a single Tupperware cup of watered-down Kool-Aid, which she used to make by mixing 4 pitchers from a single packet, without sugar to wash it down. I choked on an especially dry stuffed pepper once and then threw it up because it got stuck in my throat. Story 109. Not allowed in the house after school. Change clothes, do your homework on the back porch, then do your chores. After that, you could do anything you wanted but could not go in the house until Mom called us for supper. After everyone had eaten everything Mom had put on our plates, Dad would go sit and watch television. He picked the show and no one could speak. We were sent to bed at random times. We were afraid of Dad. His punishment was illegal, to say the least. We were never touched for a hug or bedtime routine. Story 110. When I was about 14, I asked my mother, who I was made to live with when I was around 11, to put on a shirt and stop walking around without clothes. My punishment was to immediately remove my shirt and bra when I got home from school and walk around topless. If I covered myself, another week was added. It was her husband's idea, but she did not care and made me comply. This experience was not just strange but fully abusive. Sorry to spoil the mood. Story 111. We were not allowed to sing along with commercials because my mother said it proved we watched too much television. We would just lip sync when her back was turned. She was not mean and definitely did not catch us even though we were very obvious. Story 112. Do not answer the door. Do not trust anyone. They are all out to get you. Story 113. At my grandmother's house, you had to point the remote control directly at the television. If your aim was even slightly off, she would squeal as if a phaser beam was about to disintegrate a hole in her wall. She would freak out if you aimed it at your head, warning about radiation. Story 114. My parents would make up rules on the fly and punish me for not obeying them. For example, when my sister and I were about 6 or 7 years old, she had the idea to respond with "da pop" every time someone said so, like soda pop. It was one of those silly things kids do that they think is clever. This went on for a few months, and my parents never said a word about it. Then one day, I said "da pop" to her for the first time. And suddenly my dad hit me hard enough to knock me to the floor and yelled, "I am sick of this "da pop." Then he stormed off. After that, she never said it again. Story 115. 3 squares of toilet paper are used to wipe. Anything more is considered waste. Story 116. In high school, I could hang out with friends for a maximum of 3 hours in a day, and this was only allowed on weekends, not consecutive weeks. In elementary to middle school, these are a few rules I remember. No joking. This started when my brother said something that upset me. Then he said, "Just kidding." And after that, jokes were banned in our household. No riding bikes. After my brother and I crashed into each other while riding bikes, bikes were banned too. Story 117. My grandmother and Nana did not let us into the kitchen when they cooked, always telling us to get out. Just last year, I found out my uncle, my grandmother's son, was in the kitchen as a child when a pot of boiling water fell on him. Recently, I saw his burn scars all over his back and stomach. He never took off his shirt. I cannot imagine how my grandmother felt when it happened. Story 118. I had to mow a 4-acre property with push mowers in 90 degrees and above heat. My father believed it would teach me the value of hard work, discipline, and dealing with adverse conditions. When I moved out of the house, he bought a tractor. Story 119. My parents were very strict about television ratings. I had to wait until I was 13 to watch movies rated parental guidance 13, and had to wait until 17 to watch movies rated restricted. I was grounded a few times before I was 13 and before I was 17. However, they did not care what I read. I read my first Stephen King book, Pet Sematary, at 10 and was reading Danielle Steele by 12. Go ahead, try to figure out how that makes sense. Believe me, it does not. Story 120. Some kids at school made the mistake of saying, "I am bored" to or around their grandfather. He made them sit for hours doing nothing. He had been a prisoner of war for, I think, years in Vietnam. You do not know boredom. Story 121. I wasn't allowed to drink milk at someone else's house. It was the 1980s, and drinking milk was considered an act of healthy living. It was necessary to a lot of people. My mom said asking someone for a glass of milk was like asking them for vitamins, which would be weird and deprive them of nutrients. In 2013, I watched a friend drink a quart of milk at another friend's house. Completely horrified. I didn't know the first friend was so rude. Stranger still, the second friend didn't even care. I learned a lot that day. Story 122. Only my dad was allowed to turn on the lights at night. Not even my mom could turn the lights on. If you got caught turning a light on, he would lift you up to the light and make you squeeze the hot light bulb. If he suspected you turned on a light but you received no or minimal burns, he would get even more angry and squeeze his fist over yours so the bulb would shatter into your fingers and palm. Nice guy. Story 123. For you Americans, this might be odd. I had to eat 3 potatoes or similar for 1 piece of meat. White bread was dessert at lunches. Story 124. If you didn't say, "No one is to take my place," before getting up to go to the bathroom, your place was fair game. If you said it, it was sacred. We also had the "I cut, you choose" rule. Whoever divided up cake or treats got the last portion after everyone else chose theirs. With 6 of us, both rules made sense. Story 125. I was not allowed to have a doorknob on the door to my bedroom. Story 126. I cannot really think of any unusual rules growing up. My parents were very relaxed. We had to eat dinner together, but that was about it. I usually wanted to eat dinner with them anyway. I was always home. Story 127. My friend's parents had a rule. Early is on time is late, and late is unacceptable. Whenever he came to hang out with me, they told him to be home by a certain time. If he was not at least 10 minutes early, he would get yelled at and grounded. I remember walking home with him once when he was very stressed about being late. Even though we arrived early, we got there about 8 minutes before his curfew, but they scolded him in front of me and grounded him for a week. Story 128. At my uncle's house, spiders had the right of way. The whole house was full of wolf spiders. Most had names. I accidentally stepped on one once, and they had my mom come pick me up. I was not invited back. Story 129. I was not allowed to watch romantic movies because my mother told me that they are not true and men are always bad. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.